Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dee Ryan, and on behalf of the team in Limerick Chamber, I'd like to thank you for joining us and to warmly welcome you to today's interactive webinar with Dr. Hugh O'Donnell from Ingenium. Before we kick off, I have just two items that I'd like to draw your attention to. Following today's session, we will be circulating a link to our business sentiment survey, our Midwest Business Sentiment Survey, which is currently open. The Chamber is engaging in a significant amount of lobbying of government departments and of elected reps at the moment to ensure that we get as much support as possible, targeted support for the Midwest region. And so by participating in the survey, you're really helping us to ensure that we're putting forward the right asks. You're also helping us because our experience is that the government departments will respond better when we have some quantitative data to support our asks. So I'd really encourage you, if you have a couple of moments to assist us there, please, after today's session and take the business sentiment survey. It is anonymous and we'd greatly appreciate your assistance there. The second item that I'd like to draw your attention to is the chat box that my colleague, Caoimhin Maloney, dropped a little note into there to welcome everyone to the session in. Please, we'd encourage you to drop in whatever questions you have or anything that occurs to you as we go through the session today with you into the chat function there. Caoimhin and members of the team in Ingenium are keeping an eye on what's cropping up, and they're going to feed that through to you so that we can ensure we touch on as many topics as are relevant for you in the short time that we have together. Now, before I hand over to you, I'd just like to sincerely thank him and the team in Ingenium and my own event manager, Caoimhin Maloney, for the preparation and the work that they've put into getting together this session for us this afternoon. I'm really looking forward to it. I always enjoy hearing Hugh's thoughts on leadership and strategy, and we felt it was particularly relevant at this juncture to start thinking about how we can maintain both the personal resilience and the organizational resilience that many of you have developed over the course of the crisis to date. So without further ado, and on that note, I'd like to hand over to Hugh.
Thank you, Dee, and thank you to everybody for taking the time this afternoon to join us in the webinar. I'm also joined by my colleague James Ring, who together with Caoimhin will be hosting any queries you have. So please feel free at any stage during the course of our discussion to send through any questions you have, and we'll address them individually or collectively as we go through it. I think it's fair to say that we're in unprecedented times, probably something we'll never experience again in our lifetime, I certainly hope. I'm sure, like many of you and like myself, we're bombarded today by so many different things going on in terms of information, research, feedback, changes in government policy, legislation, and other governance matters that are maybe confusing in some respects. But today, I'd like to try and help assimilate some of those into some structure. And I'd like to do it in two strands. I'd like to look at it personally as an individual, as leaders, how our minds react to what's going on and the changes and how we adapt. And secondly, from a market perspective and looking at some of the economic principles and some of the trends that we're seeing and how do we understand and interpolate those relative to how we might process them, relative to your particular business and your particular sector. And that applies to all of us, whether you're an entrepreneur, an SME owner, where your business has stalled, where your supply chain has stopped, where your customers aren't looking to spend, you're looking to do what to do next, whether you're a middle management in a multinational organization and you're worried about your career and what's next for you, whether you're in the hospitality industry and perhaps your business has stopped and you're worried about how to reopen and how to start again, or if you're in the public sector and you're wondering how you're going to add value as a catalyst to bring those businesses together. Yeah, all of these can be looked at through the different lenses that I'll present to you today, and hopefully we can try and land on some sense together. And I look forward to getting your feedback as we go through. So I'd like to start with this model, which dates back to post-Cold War, when it was introduced by the US Army to plan their future in challenging times. But it's been operationalized by lots of business strategists in the last 10 years. The VUCA model, which looks at volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I can certainly say in the current times, it's very applicable. When we try and dissect the image in the graph and say, well, on the bottom horizontal axis, we're looking at how much do we know about a situation moving from left to right. And then on the vertical, it's about, well, how well can you predict the results of your actions or decisions? And if I try and navigate around this clockwise, starting with complexity, that's about the changing rules and regulations, the changing laws of government, a lot of new policies, and a lot of new stimulus has been put into place. But also there's the whole aspect of globalization, because we live in a global economy. And how do we keep up to date with the complex number of different changing scenarios? We know something about it. We can predict our outcomes from it to a certain degree. Myself, I'm involved in a number of different businesses, and I have certain things that I'm involved in that are involved in very complex scenarios, like a project in China that is undergoing a whole review because of changing globalization rules between US and China, and how they might interpret the different aspects of how that they retain ownership. And certainly globalization is something that's been tested currently. Volatility in oil and gas markets, for example, last year we had oil prices at $60 a barrel. 6 weeks ago they were at 10, and okay, they've recovered somewhat recently, but making decisions in rapidly and changing unexpected markets, you know, we have to think about the long term, we have to think about the short term, and it's not as complex as other aspects of this grid, but it's certainly there for consideration. And of course we have uncertainty of pending changes, for example, in our government, and how they implement all of these different policies to manage COVID, to manage Brexit, and to manage the green energy challenge that they've set or about to set for themselves in reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So myself, I'm involved in some renewable energy business, which has certain uncertainty about it, but I have a good knowledge of knowing what I know, and I'm just waiting on certain outcomes. The most challenging of the lot is the ambiguity, which is the unknown unknown. What is it we don't know that we don't know yet? And Confucius, the great Chinese philosopher, said, wisdom comes from what you don't know. And the stock markets are a great example of that, in that, you know, when this pandemic hit, global demand significantly reduced for lots of things, which resulted in a meltdown of stock markets. Obviously, that's been buoyed by stimulus from many different governments in a global economy. But who's to say that a second outbreak wouldn't create significant ambiguity again, because it's going to drive different demand profile. And right now, the recovery that we've seen in the stock markets has been buoyed by the perception that the stimulus that has been put in place will continue to drive that. So for me, I find myself hovering the grid daily in terms of different things and trying to dissect decisions that I make as a business leader. What I'd like to start with, though, is I'd really like to understand where everybody's at. So we're going to start with a bit of a poll. And what I'd like you to think about, for you as a leader with your business, where do you fit on this? Is it the complexity of managing all these different variables that have been added in the changing in legislation and how that affects your business? Is it the ambiguity or the total ambiguity that exists because we have so many unknown unknowns, yes? Or are these starting to be mitigated? Or is it the volatility of the markets you're operating in and how unstable they might be in the near term? Or is it the uncertainty impact of something that you do know, but you're not sure what the outcome is going to be? Or is it simply all of the above? So we just launched that panel, and we'd just like to get your feedback. It's a singular answer, so just pick one of the boxes. Okay, so let's have a look. So it's quite balanced. Obviously, a large portion of you feel that it's everything, all of the above, and how it hovers. Uncertainty to the lesser degree. Volatility of changing markets quite high. Ambiguity, 21% is a lot. So if we add up ambiguity and all of the above, it's probably the largest segment of everything. So it does raise the question that many of you are feeling a bit in the dark, as we can well imagine, and that's completely understandable. So what is it we can do about it? And I want to explore today about resilience, and more so sustaining resilience. But let's unpack what it is first. And I think it's about the ability to recover or adjust from this misfortune or change. Now, we didn't cause this change, this misfortune, so a lot of us would be feeling that we are victims of the change, but feeling like a victim isn't going to fix it. What is testing our ability to recover from it. And that requires us thinking a bit deeper and to sustain the resilience that we've shown so far. I call upon two good quotes that bring to mind something that you wouldn't think these two characters have anything in common, but their change in resilience perspective happened exactly at the same time. I lived in South Africa for 14 years, and I had the pleasure and great fortune of meeting this man on the left once. And it was astounding to think how his resilience has shaped the way a lot of people think, a lot of leaders think and feel. And certainly from my perspective, when you think about his 27 years in jail and how he showed and demonstrated resilience through that time, and how he acted when he came out to achieve his goal was remarkable. And I think his quote reflects about, don't judge me by my success, but how many times I fell down and got back up again. And we've certainly been knocked down a few times, and we've got back up, and we need to continue that way. J.K. Rowling on the other side was, believe it or not, came from a very poor family, a very poor background, and had a very misfortunate upbringing, living in poor income streams, being rejected. But her change in life came when her mother died in 1990 from multiple sclerosis, around the same time as Nelson Mandela got out of jail. And her resilience grew from the fact that she said, well, now I've hit rock bottom. I can't go any further. From this, I will rebuild. So it gives us a sense that resilience is something that evolves, and it's something that it's not a finite binary state of mind. It's something that we think we're signed up for a 100-meter dash, and all of a sudden we realize we've entered a marathon. And that's what we're on here now, and we're probably just sort of at the first 25% milestone of the marathon, and we think we might have already been finished it. So how do we find this resilience? Where is it? And if we think about domains, and they're like sources of relevance, and collectively there's 6 here which I'd like to share. And the first one has been vision. And as organizations, we've all got visions for what we want to achieve. Positions in the industry, positions where we want to achieve that we may never get there. But right now, it's about resetting that vision to something that's a lot more achievable. And in a lot of organizations, the vision is being reset to survival and sustainment. So you're surviving in a way that you will sustain. As a leader, composure is everything, because as the leader, we're being watched all the time, and those around us are observing us. The shadows we cast are quite wide. The decisions we make today will impact our businesses and the people who work with us for many years to come. So being calm, being in control is very important. It's not to say you need to be unauthentic, but you have to lead like a swan in being controlled and calm despite the chaos that might be going on around you. And then there's reasoning about decisions, about understanding and how you might apply some rationale to the process of making some critical business decisions and life decisions in the coming weeks and months. And I'll share a process with you very shortly that I'd like to chat about. And then, of course, there's health, and our personal health, nutrition and sleep and exercise is never more critical at the moment. In my tenure as a leader, I spent about 15 years working with various Japanese organizations all over the world. And I came to learn about a term that they have there called karashi, which means death by overworking. And they have, on average, about 2,000 people who die every year from karashi. So we certainly don't want to be a statistic of that. So keeping our health foremost is what's going to sustain us. And tenacity is a great value and skill set and trait to have, but undirected without the other domains can lead us in a wrong direction, and we might end up as a tenacious lone nut. But to build resilience, we certainly need tenacity. And collaboration, lastly, is critically important at the moment, because we've got to do this with others. Yes, we can make quick decisions like we've had to sustain short term, but long term, we want to win. We have to do it with others. And for those of you who are watching the Michael Jordan documentary at the moment on Netflix, one of the things he says is that you can win a game on your own, but to win a championship, you have to do it with a team. So that's critically important to think about those. So as we reflect on those domains, I like to overlay it with a chap in history who has had a big influence in the way I certainly go about my business. And that's Carl Jung, who was one of the founders of psychoanalysis. And he was the founder of many great things that we experience today in how we see ourselves as leaders. He was the original founder and developer and designer and researcher behind the Myers-Briggs personality model. And he's also the founder of some of the theories we use and have adapted in decision making, and particularly our stylus model. But he worked in his early career with Sigmund Freud, who was the original founder of psychoanalysis. But the two separated early in Jung's career when Jung decided he had a different philosophy. Jung's theory is that you can actually change and develop your personality and how you grow, whereas Freud was very much, well, you have your lot. By the age of 12, you're kind of fixed and you can't change. Now, fortunately for us, at this current predicament, Jung was right, and we're thankful of that, because a lot of us do need to change a bit, and we do need to reflect on things we've learned and things we've adapted and then apply them. The chaos quote for me is very relevant. And if you think about, in all chaos, there's cosmos. In all order, there's a secret order. I've often said in chaos, there's cash. But you have to stay in the game through the chaos to reap the rewards. You have to be on the pitch in the game. So you have to reset your vision to survive. Because for those that have been involved in businesses, you've all had good wins somewhere along your career, somewhere along your business cycle. And getting over one hurdle, there might be something waiting for you when you get over. But also, and critically, is Jung said, I am what I chose to be. I decided to be a leader. I decided to do certain things. And that is what is different. And I think the choices we make and how we go about our business in the coming weeks and months will be critical in that respect. So many of you will be familiar with the Ingenium stylus decision-making framework, which was originated from the work of Carl Jung in 1920. and further developed by many researchers and then adapted by Ingenium. But it says simply that on the left-hand side of the diagram, if you fit in this area, you're very good in analytical skills, you're very good at processing information, and you're very good at getting things done. And that's very good at managing task and process. It's very good with transactions, and it's very good with managing change. If you're on the right-hand side of the diagram, you're very conceptual, you generate ideas, you're very good engaging others and understanding empathy. That's about leading change. It's about being transformational, and it's about people and outcomes. As we go through the coming months, we will have to find a way of elevating up to the upper half, where we manage and lead change, where we create ideas in conceptual, where we analyze data and information to make the right decisions. Critically at the moment, as supply chains across all sectors are changing, we have to innovate with new ideas to disrupt that supply chain, because habits have been formed over the last 8 weeks, 2.5 months by consumers, and those habits may not change. If we want to revert to the old norm, we will have to disrupt those habits in a different way, which will require a lot of conceptual thinking, and it will require a lot of analytical skills to make it happen. If we dig deeper into the brain science behind this and open it up a bit more, the concept of left brain, right brain is a framework for thinking like I've just mentioned, as opposed to the fact that your brain is actually different on both sides. But one thing that's fundamentally important and very interesting about the human mind is one aspect of the brain. And now the brain, as we know, is an organ that continues to deteriorate throughout our lifetime and shrinks, except for one component, the hippocampus, which is that part of the brain that stores memories, emotions, and knowledge about everything that's happened in our life. And when we come to situations like we're in right now, we reach for our hippocampus, and unfortunately there's nothing there to tell us what we have or what we don't have. So it's all the more reason why we have to navigate all of the different quadrants to come up with the right solutions, depending whatever sector, whatever markets we're in. And to do that, I've got a simple process that I use all the time. And it's called the 6 steps in decision making, which links back to the same model. And a lot of us have been jumping straight to step 5 in the last 2 months, because we're in emergency situations and we haven't had the time to really consider the other steps. But whether the market you're in is shrinking, or the supply chain is changing, or there's different stimulus packages going on around it, it's important as we reset and we emerge out of this that we follow these and business critical decisions, whatever they are, whether you're the entrepreneur or the SME owner, whether you're the executive in the multinational, whether you're in the overall in the government framework of in advisory roles, all of these situations will apply to you. The first thing you got to do is analyze the situation. What's actually going on around me? What do I know? What data do I collect in markets and stimulus, in trends, in supply chains, in changes? Set my objectives in terms of what is it I'm trying to achieve: survival, sustainment of staff, and then look for options and think about the innovative side. And these first 3 steps will immediately help you to navigate around all the quadrants, and then critically evaluate those options. What can I actually do about it? And that requires skill sets at the top half of the chart in terms of conceptual idea generation and analysis, and then make the decision and implement it, and then evaluate it. right now we're probably evaluating decisions we made in the last couple of years. And why didn't we make other different decisions that would have set us up better for now? Well, the same process of learning will apply. And we are judged by the quality of those choices. And as leaders, we're really challenged right now to step through this process. And I think, when you think about some of the business critical decisions you have to reshape your business, to reset your business, this will be pretty important to follow this. So that's sort of the first part of it. That it looks at it from the inside out in terms of you as a leader, you as a person. But some interesting information here that reflects here. We might just have a question before we move off the inside out approach from the human perspective. So James, you have some questions there that are...
Yeah, just one that's coming in, Hugh, which is, what was the hardest decision you've had to make in your work life, and why was it so hard?
I guess I've been very fortunate in my work life that, yes, I've had a lot of challenges. I've had a lot of situations where resilience was tested. And I've been in situations where you're in the trenches. And I believe that some of the philosophies, some of the ideas I've shared with you is what would have sustained me through that. It was different to what we've experienced in the past. But I've certainly been on some major projects where we've had some major challenges, and that inner resilience is what would have got me through. And then that's why I can look back and say, well, there is always something over the horizon if you can sustain that. No one particular decision. I guess I'm going to share with you a case study of listing in the stock market in the middle of the global financial crisis shortly. And I might say, well, that was a critical decision, which at the time wasn't logical to a lot of people, but it turned out to be a pretty good one. So I'll share that with you shortly. Okay. So moving to the economics, and I think there's a lot of information and data being shared at the moment, and I'm not an economist, but I've filtered out some what I think is very relevant information here. The first chart on the right-hand side looks at what is the GDP impact on a country by country for the top 13 economies in the world for every month of lockdown. And you can see there that the world average is just over 2% for every month of lockdown, which would suggest that the overall, for 2.5 months of lockdown, suggests a sort of 6 to 7% global GDP drop this year. But what's interesting is when you correlate the cultural norms of the countries right across the span here, and you see that the impact in China and India, where there's a lot of respect for hierarchy and discipline, versus the egalitarian nature of the countries at the lower end of the graph, where the impact has been significantly higher. From an Irish perspective, looking at the two sets of statistics on the bottom left, that our finance minister in April set out a forecast of a 10% reduction in GDP for this year, which was later refined in the European Commission's report about a week and a half ago, where that decline is back to 8%, suggests that there's some positivity emerging as the economy opens up. But there is light at the end of the tunnel in that we're forecasting that growth will then grow again up to 6% next year. So it's a very positive outlook into 2021, despite the size of the trench we are in right now, we feel we're in right now. Another interesting piece of information on the left-hand side graph there, which was a recent Citibank report, when it looked at the total economic global stimulus being afforded across all different central banks around the world, from the Fed, the European Central Bank, at just under $6 trillion. And the speed at which that stimulus has been unveiled to impact, learning from the global financial crisis, is what really has lessened the impact. So despite the chaos and the impact we've felt and have seen, this has been significantly mitigated by the reaction, the speedy reaction of central banks around the world. In Ireland, our reaction has been significantly fast as well. And a range of different stimulus packages, as we know, as we've seen, have been introduced. And they've had significant impact in curtailing the challenge. There's different numbers quoted from the original stimulus of 3 billion, and it may, including direct and indirect support, go up to 30 billion. And some of that's going to be done directly with central bank level. A lot of it is going to be filtered through primary banks and how they are giving credit guarantees to provide capital to businesses. And business capital, it couldn't be at an all-time greater availability level at lowest interest rates possible. So the support mechanisms are there in terms of economic stimulus. And from an Irish perspective, I think there's a lot more to come. I feel that there is sandbagging of certain stimulus packages, which the government will unveil in the coming weeks, which will support their role in continuing what they've started. When I look from an Irish perspective then at the different sectors, and we all service different sectors, we're all in different sectors, we're all a supply chain in some part of that sector. And understanding supply chain resilience is about understanding how you serve that sector and how you might need to disrupt the way you supply. It's not surprising that the sectors that achieved the relatively highest growth in 2018 and 2019 are the ones that are showing the potential for the most resilience in 2020. And it's about agriculture and the retail part of that's going to sustain growth as more people at home are buying more retail products. It's about information and communication. In the data-driven world, when you look at e-commerce, when you look at mobile telephony, when you look at demand for data, that sector continues to grow, albeit at a modest rate. And thirdly is about public administration expenditure, that getting in the supply chain of that. So those three are the ones you want to be in the most. The ones that are most challenged then, in terms of entertainment, in terms of restaurants, are the ones that if you're in that sector and you can't leverage into other sectors, well, you've just got to try and innovate what you do within that sector. For many, these figures presented in the latest central bank report are seen as somewhat conservative, but they are giving us a very clear snapshot of what we're likely to expect this year. If I was to reflect on my own journey and go back to one of the earlier questions, is I want to share a case study of resilience with you. And back in 2008, I was the CEO of Kent's at the time, which was a global energy services firm. Its origins was a family business in electrical contracting. It went through an MBO in '89. It made history in '94 as a company that went into an examinership. And in 2000, I had the good fortune of taking over as CEO. As part of the growth strategy to raise capital, as part of the shareholder plan, we decided to list in the London AIM market right in the middle, or at the commencement, should I say, of the global financial crisis. Fortunately, we got the listing progressed and concluded before the real challenges hit. But as you can see, through to 2012 from 2008, that from an outside-in perspective, from a shareholder perspective, the organization grew by 300% in that period of time, and with revenues in excess of $2 billion dollars and a backlog which provided the visibility of work of in excess of 4.5 billion. Now that is one aspect of the story, but how does something like that happen? It doesn't happen just because you list in the stock market. It doesn't happen just because it happens to be at the right time. It happens because of when I look at it from the inside out, what was it actually really took place, and how do we think about that and learn from that? So it's about having engagement in resilient sectors, and the sectors that Kent at the time were in resources and commodities, which were all high in demand. Oil and gas at the time was also high in demand. Still, the outlook for oil and gas is still pretty high, but it's buoyed by renewables. We were at the advent of renewables, so that the combination and the diversity of those sectors certainly made our position resilient. Also working with clients in those sectors who were driving capital growth, were meeting the demands, were doing it in a way that they needed to form partnerships. And so blue chip clients, and that included national governments, because they're also providing long-term expenditure, especially at the moment, to be in the supply chain of national governments. To have a vision of, we wanted to be the best and specialists, but also global, in that having diversity to different markets gave us growth opportunities, gave us the capacity to grow. We certainly had a vision that we would be able to go anywhere in the world and replicate our business model, which is really what differentiated us, and also being easy to work with. So we were tenacious. And then there was a shared belief, and this goes back to that point I mentioned earlier on resilience, about collaboration, that there was certainly a shared purpose. Everybody in the organization knew what it was we were trying to do. Everybody experienced the same challenges in the global financial crisis, but there was a certain belief that everybody felt we were in the right place and we could do it. And certainly in the first year of being listed on the stock market in the middle of the global financial crisis, like we're in now in the trenches, people felt it was a bad decision. But as we emerge from it and look back retrospectively, there's sort of in chaos, there's cosmos. And that's really how it came to be. But certainly everybody on the journey was part of this. And I think getting people together and getting people to have that shared belief is what sustained that resilience. If I think about an example of a market, and I'm not suggesting that everybody rushes out and enters the global data center market, but data is the new commodity of today. And being involved in any data, e-commerce, ICT type market sector is really where the largest growth aspects are. And that's probably further embellished in today's market post COVID-19, given remote working. This example shows the growth pre-COVID of the market for global data demand. This includes all the primary developers of the Facebooks, the Googles, the Apples, but also all the secondary developers who create data centers for others to use. And that showed on average 16% growth forecast up through to 2027. From a post-COVID-19 perspective, analysts are suggesting that, well, given remote working, continued data demand, growth in social media, online gaming, use of products, of tools like we're using today, that demand, although the data hasn't been published, it's expected not to reduce but increase. And if you take that example, that those markets are not just here in Ireland, but Europe and lots of other primary economies, as well as secondary economies that are growing. The key aspect, as an example, is in the supply chain, that although the market is growing significantly, the capacity to serve that market is going to be challenged because of what's happened in COVID-19, and that many suppliers won't have the capacity to serve it. And it presents opportunities for those in the supply chain to innovate, to look at different ways of doing it. And that has been further validated by the developers suggesting that they feel that the capacity of the supply chains won't be able to deliver, which means that there's opportunities. And lots of other markets are like that where supply chains will be constrained because of capacity. And that's where the opportunities, I think, lie. Finally, it's about, when I think about change and when I reflect on the quantum of change that we're experiencing right now. And for many of us, we're continuously adapting. We're continuously modifying the way we do our business, or have in the past. And you think about change across this perspective of realignment to transformation, or incremental to big bang. These four frames present themselves. And if you're going to significantly change your business, you're going to evolve into something different. And certainly my experience when I was with Kent's as CEO for 12 years, we evolved from an electrical contracting company into a global energy services firm. The change was transformational, but it was incremental. Certain organizations have changed in a different way. They've gone through reconstruction. They've completely changed over time their businesses. And some businesses have had to go through revolutions. And businesses like Nokia tried to go through a revolution, but maybe left it too late. But every one of us has some aspect of where we might fit today. And I'd just like to get a sense of where everybody feels they are on this grid. So I'm going to set up a second poll just to get a reflection where you think your business is. Are you in adaptation? Are you in reconstruction? Are you in evolution? Or are you in revolution? So if you could just let me know. Okay, well, it's very interesting that revolution is the lowest, sorry, the second lowest. It's, for some, one might think that would be the highest at the moment. The highest remains adaptation, which is encouraging that the business model that we've set up continues to apply, but it needs to be modified, it needs to be tweaked, it needs to be aligned. There is evolution, is the second largest one, which means there's going to be some innovation in the supply chain where you fit in and where you grow. Then revolution, then reconstruction. So that's really good. Thank you for that feedback. I just have a couple of questions coming in. James, would you like to field them?
Yeah, I would. One goes back to the outlook on the economy, Hugh. So there's a lot of fear out there given the unknown and the negative press on the economy. What advice would you give business owners to counteract the fear and focus on the future?
Whilst this particular graph doesn't inspire confidence, the information that's contained in here, in the stimulus that's been created. Now, I know that certain aspects of government are today challenging additional stimulus packages to be revealed, to be given. I was on a webinar recently where Pascal Dunne, he spoke about emerging stimulus, and he spoke about credit guarantees, all of which provide visibility of security. To me, it's about from a government perspective, they have to weigh up the continued stimulus that they provide and minimize the uncertainty, and then implement a capital expansion program where they're getting value and bang for their buck. And the sooner they implement the second wave of capital injection in infrastructure projects, in construction projects, in co-investments, in energy and other industries, the sooner people will productively be going back to work. So that positivity is emerging, and there's a lot of good feedback that's emerging. There's also emerging feedback that the lockdown windows that we're on might be shortened, because there's obviously a balance between health and there's a balance between let's get this economy back to work. So the signs for those two are both pointing in a positive direction.
Yeah, and linked to that actually is, do you see major advantages or disadvantages to being an island geographically in this current or post the crisis?
I think Ireland as a nation, from my experience, we've always punched above our weight. We've always been the underdog, and we've leveraged that the best we can. And that's given us great resilience and great results and great entrepreneurs and great partnerships with global organizations. That's been my personal experience. I think as an island, we have been very open on our policy for attracting foreign direct investments, and the outlook in future government, I can't see it changing, that it will continue to attract foreign direct investment from a corporation tax incentive plan or incentive profile perspective. Obviously, globalization exists. Some people in certain global economies are trying to redefine what that means by trying to get their international domestic businesses back home.
Yeah.
But those international businesses are supplying a global market. We have to reflect this inside and post-COVID. We still have Brexit to deal with, and they're our largest trading partner. They also have the largest per capita race and challenges with COVID. They're high on the grid of GDP reduction. They have the largest debt in Europe, so they'll be challenged. So I think that's probably going to be a bigger challenge than the fact that we're an island. The fact that our biggest trading partner is going to be significantly impacted the most.
They're focused more on macroeconomic type ideas, but I want to bring one down to the company level, and then I want to look at the personal level. So one is coming here, agree with resilience and ability to change, but how do you achieve this without the financial cushion or resources to buy the time needed to realign?
Yeah, so the confluence of reduction in stimuli, which we hope might get extended in terms of benefits, available capital. Capital will become available through banks for this shortly. That's what we're hearing. And that capital will be available at pretty competitive rates, because let's face it, with this chart on the left, with the central bank's stimulus, the cost of capital is now at zero. Obviously, how that distills its way down to businesses is not going to be at zero, but it's going to be much less than in the past. If your business is sustainable, if your ideas have a sense of sustainability and a chance to perform, and you've done everything you can to mitigate, you have a much better chance of getting access to capital, which is going to bridge that gap.
But I think there'll have to be an acceptance, though, that there's going to be pain for everybody in this financially.
Yeah, I think part of that sustainability model is managing cost, mitigating costs, and everybody in the supply chain is having to do that, because that's an expectation. That's the new norm. But to present yourself to get capital, you have to have business plan that out.
Yeah. This is more going down to the personal level, and you're a husband, a father who's at home, working at home at the moment. So there's a question coming here, which is, how do you advise we maintain the enthusiasm required for the fight we are in? We're trying to master new IT skills, deal with poor broadband coverage, remote working, minding children at home, and everything else that we need to go on. How do we maintain the energy for the fight?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think it's about resetting. Like every day you have to reset and almost like think about the domains that I put out there of resilience, because that's where you find us. And you may not use the same one every day. You may have to select from that menu each day to build resilience, because like I mentioned at the beginning, as the leader, you are the leader, and the shadows you cast are wise, and everybody's watching you, and it's up to you to be able to present that resilience. And it doesn't mean you're presenting a position or presentation of yourself that's not real. It's you're fueled by resilience, knowing that. And I think if you take one thing away, is that in chaos there's cosmos, that you have to get through it, and that future point is what you're trying to achieve, because that's about the security of your family, it's about the security of your team. And if you don't get there, if you're not on the pitch, you're not going to score the goal. So you have to get to that point. And that stimulus, that emotional stimulus, is what will get you to get through those points that you made.
As a leader, what type of leader would you classify yourself as? And also, will that change, or have you seen a change in the current environment?
Yeah, if I go back to our famous this stylus diagram, and try and present myself in this mode here. I guess I grew up being very analytical and very direct. They were my innate characteristics. As I started to work with global cultures, I learned a lot more about this right-hand side of the brain. And more laterally, in the last 5 years, I've become a lot more conceptual, because you default maybe to areas where you believe are required. And certainly I'm very much into idea generation and engaging with people for ideas, knowing that they have to be put through the sieve if they're going to be made any sense of. So yes, I would have changed a lot, which validates Carl Jung's theory that you can change. And tools like this can help you visualize that. And we're constantly innovating ideas. And at the time, it doesn't seem like, how do you actually put this to market? But if you don't start somewhere, if you don't build, you're not going to get there. And some of them are successful, and maybe some of them are not.
So I'm going to hand it back to you, Hugh, to take us to a conclusion.
Yeah. So thank you for those questions. It allowed me just to maybe put a bit more perspective on some ideas. Thank you for your 2 polls. But if I was to summarize, I think firstly it's thinking about the VUCA model and the fact that there's 4 different perspectives in there. Think about where you're at, and then let that be your building blocks, knowing what you can control, what you can influence, and also to acknowledge and know what it is you don't know. From a sector perspective, knowing the markets that are growing and the supply chain that you're in, and how do you disrupt that or modify the habits of your consumers, your buyers in that process. And that's where innovation, creativity, conceptual thinking will be required. I've shared with you the sort of domains of resilience, which can be as like a check sheet, and it's good. It's a good comfort blanket to go back to and think about. It's like a sense check. Dealing with ambiguity is where we're at. So we're in ambiguity. If you're an analytical person, you can handle ambiguity as long as you've got a process to digest and distill it. But we're in a lot of ambiguity where there is no process. So we have to rely on others maybe to help us in that area. The 6 steps is a good way of getting through the steps to for any critical decisions in business, to engage with others. And the quantum of change model I shared with you, I think it's also good to share that with your teams, because you can share that model tomorrow with all of your teams so that everybody's on the same page. Because as we know that before COVID came along, one of the biggest challenges in communication is the illusion that has taken place. And we might all believe we're in an adaptation, or we're in revolution, or whatever frame we're in, but does everybody else in our team see this? And sometimes that's a great way to share that idea and get your team to maybe populate that with you. And again, just my own personal experience is from my Kent's experiences is, be in the right sectors that are resilient and growing, work with the right clients who want to work with you and have blue chip values, have your vision that's clear where you're going, and then build a shared belief with your team that everybody knows where you're going. And whether that team is small or whether that team is big, that team and that shared belief is what's going to sustain you through this current crisis. So from my side, that's about all I've got to share. I'd like to thank everybody for joining, and if there's any questions or information that you require, or anything from the chamber, from Dee, from Quiva, I'm sure they'll make the information we've discussed today available to you should you wish. So thank you very much.